So this is the walkthrough for the track I just made. It was all made so it could be played one hand because I only have the full use of my left hand and partial use of my right hand. Thanks to modern tools, I'm able to create music, whether it be through sequences like Nest or the Arturia keystep. I've just got the 37, not the Pro, but it is great for playing chords and then using those chords to sequence unusual arpeggiators, which I did in this track. I started off with pads, which was sequenced in Nest, and I used Shaperbox and Sketch Cassette and Valhalla Delay just to add a bit more interest to the sounds that I used within Nest. Rather than output MIDI, which I was having trouble with how Ableton interacts with Nest, I decided to record the sounds rather than deal with the MIDI. So the synth I used was the Hydra Synth 3 piano pad. I played with the attack and release to get it to work and fit within the sequence that I created in Nest, and it was using the arpeggiator and sending the voice off to 4 different gates or triggers. I'm not really sure. I'm not completely au fait with the language, but it was able to produce some really interesting pads that I could just use one finger to change the mood and feel. And there were 5 different instances of, or 5 different scenes. And you can see I was able to cut those up and use those at different parts. So the pad is constantly changing, and I overlapped them to create some interest. And I was really happy with how the pad turned out, and it was perhaps the easiest thing for me to achieve. So we can move on to the drums, and the drums were also created in Nest. And again, I use multiple scenes within Nest to create not just one drum track. I created multiple, which I then collaged together in different parts of the songs. You can see, if I zoom out a bit, how many were actually used. I'll actually just go back up to the pads, and you can see how they were all overlaid and worked together to create the sound that I wanted out of the pads. But back to the drums, we have another instance of Nest. Don't worry about the Valhalla Vintage. I didn't use it on the drums in the end. I didn't need it. So I just used the clock from Nest to create some different drum patterns. And the sound I used from Contact was actually from 2 different machines. It was the Perkins HD01, and I really liked the sound of it, and it went to instance 2 and 3. So you can see outputs 2 and 3, I should say. So, and instant 1 was the Godfather, which I'll use in another part of this track, and just get a huge sound from the Godfather. So, and after doing the drums, I needed something more, and my go-to, of course, is an ARP. And I thought about just laying down an ARP from the keystep, which is a great arpeggiator, and you can get a lot of variety. But I really do like what Nest is able to do. Again, I've got some shaper box on that. I'll come back to shaper box and what it can do in one of the other examples. But Nest, in this case, created a really interesting sound. With the arpeggiator, I sent it to 2 versions of the Dreadbox. What version of the Dreadbox did I use? I used the Massive Unison, and I also used from the Nymph, the Outer Space. And by sending the voices to 2 different versions of that synth, it's almost like 2 different instruments playing. So you can see that 7 and 8 of the output was sent to the Massive Unison, and 6 was sent to the Outer Space. And again, I played with the release and sustain to get the envelopes I liked. So after I finished the ARPs, I then decided to add some texture, and I went to Zaps and the Plankton Winter module, and that was literally some 1-finger drumming that I put in live. It wasn't quantized, so it will be slightly off the grid, and there was no processing involved in that. Then I thought I needed even more texture, sort of a rhythmic texture, and that's where I grabbed the Godfather again. You can see that here, and added Other Desert Cities, which I think is an audio damage plugin, and an instance of Shaperbox 2. In this instance, I use Shaperbox 2 to really do some sound designy things and really create some movement, some change from the original sound, but staying true to itself. The last thing I want to point out is the noise shaper, which is newly released and part of the Shaperbox bundle. I actually used the texture from Heinbach's recorder and grabbed the wave file that was available, and I used the envelope and the LFO in concert to create some movement that you don't typically get from a plugin. And I really like the organic nature and the organic noise it created. Unlike traditional tape recording emulations, which are either just an envelope follower or an LFO or constant noise, this was able to produce something in between. It's not a replica of a tape machine, but it does sort of hint at an organicness. So that's a walkthrough of my track. Hopefully anybody that actually watched this gained a little bit of understanding.